Welcome to Inside 11Alive News Investigates. I'm Cheryl Preheim. You know, Amazon ships approximately 1.6 million packages a day. And to get all of those items from point A to point B, they rely on thousands of truck drivers to haul their shipments. But as senior investigator Rebecca Lindstrom and the team found, some believe the way that Amazon hires its drivers is making our roads less safe.
One crash. 3 people killed and at least 7 rushed to the hospital.
It has catastrophic impacts.
But this crash near the Georgia-Tennessee line isn't even counted in the 22 Amazon cargo crashes we found in court records involving interstate licensed drivers since 2023.
This isn't about the person delivering that package to your door. This is about the middle mile, that stretch between warehouses.
What we've learned once we've started digging is...
Attorney Adewale Odetunde says Amazon created a special app to hire drivers directly, tapping into small companies that are often just one guy with a rig.
This is a warning citation. Instruct you to maintain lane, okay?
The danger and the concern is that Amazon isn't truly vetting these drivers.
Back up!
Amazon would strongly dispute that claim, but comparing our analysis of lawsuits to this University of Tennessee professor's review of U.S. DOT safety records, the trend remains the same.
Amazon, if you compare to their peers, is generally hiring less safe carriers.
Alex Scott analyzed 11,000 carriers that reported hauling at least one shipment for Amazon, Costco, Target, and Walmart. He says Amazon hired significantly more carriers with no safety score or an unsafe driving score than the competition.
It's not fair that she has to live her life like this.
3-year-old Venari spent 2 months in the hospital after her grandmother says a tractor trailer carrying Amazon cargo hit the back of her mom's car.
She has a traumatic brain injury. She is paralyzed from up under her chest down.
The lawsuit filed on behalf of Venari alleges that a policy violation led Amazon to block Ugardi Trucking from picking up loads. But at the time of this crash, the owner of that company was driving a load for Gonzalez Freight in his Ugardi truck.
They'll close that company down, open up a brand new company, and now they've got a clean safety rating.
But Amazon says this was actually a case of illegal subcontracting. It is the U.S. DOT that is responsible for inspecting trucks and qualifying drivers. 11Alive News Investigates found there is often no data for companies like Amazon to review. Of the companies still licensed after the crashes that triggered lawsuits in Georgia, 64% have no rating or safety inspection score.
I think it's a situation where the U.S. DOT is just overwhelmed with the sheer number of motor carriers that there are.
Still, Odetunde and families impacted say there are things companies can do independently to better vet who is hauling their cargo.
I think they see it as the cost of doing business.
A cost with those injured paying the price. In Atlanta, Rebecca Lindstrom, 11Alive News Investigates.
So many layers to the story. Rebecca Lindstrom joining us now to talk about these findings. So, Rebecca, you compare Amazon to places like Target. Why not draw a line of comparison to maybe UPS and FedEx?
I mean, obviously those companies ship cargo, but Amazon really is a retailer at heart. And that's why we wanted to remove from the data that person that is putting the package on your doorstep and just really focus on that middle mile. Again, that stretch between warehouses. Without getting police body camera video or pictures from each and every crash, it is hard to know what the driver was doing at the time of the crash. So we only looked at those that had an interstate license. That is a license that allows the driver to carry cargo over state lines. And we eliminated any lawsuit where we could tell from the description that the driver was pulling into a driveway or a neighborhood. Now, I do want to say we rely on our trucking industry to get those goods to the store. So this really isn't a story that is anti-trucking industry.
Sure.
Most of them do a great job. I know I drive I-75. both ways every single day, and I always try to be respectful of the distance that they need in order to change lanes, or just, the empathy for having to haul something that big going through town. But this is a large industry, and what we've really discovered is that our investigation, has found that the federal government just can't keep up with all of the new trucking companies that are on the road. And as a result, there is very limited data available to make a decision on whether a carrier is safe. And so that's why it's just really falling upon these companies to do the job instead.
You think about the last couple of years, I think we've all learned so much about the supply chain and why it's so vital for the things that we need every single day. But this safety is a key as well. What data is available so that you can take that deeper look and perhaps changes could come from it?
Yeah, and exactly, because you remember, this is a really big vehicle, so if it's going to get into a crash, if it's going to make an impact, it's going to make a big difference for whatever it is that it is hitting. So there are two data metrics provided by the federal government to determine if a company is safe to operate. The first is a US DOT rating. That is where an inspector goes to the place of business and reviews the company's policies, their training, their staffing information. They look at their logbooks and they look at the trucks that are on site. It then gives the company a rating of either satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory. This is kind of a long-term historical look at the company. Then there is the behavior analysis and safety improvement categories, or BASIC as it's called. It looks at roadside inspections, crash reports, and investigations that have been conducted within the past 24 months. Amazon says it relies more on that basic score than the US DOT rating because this really is to them more of a sign of what is happening when that vehicle is out on the roadways. But according to them, only 6% of the trucking companies that the US DOT is reviewing actually have that US DOT rating that would say whether it's satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So again, though, if you don't have a basic score, if you don't have a US DOT score, this information, it just isn't really helpful.
There are hundreds of thousands of trucking companies on the road. There are thousands of new ones every year entering and thousands exiting. So the DOT does not have the resources to do in-depth investigations of all of these carriers on the road. So the company you talk about, a one-truck carrier, the DOT generally doesn't have the resources to investigate all of those carriers. So it's up to the shipper, the Amazons of the world, to make sure that the carriers that they are using are safe and responsible.
Again, critics say this speaks to how new and potentially inexperienced companies could be causing more of a hazard on the road because there just hasn't been that length of time to find out if what they're doing, if their policies, if their training really is enough to keep motorists safe. Of the lawsuits that we looked at during our time period from 2023 to now, the oldest company involved in an Amazon-related auto tort lawsuit here in Georgia that we found was 7 years old. But more than half we found were created since 2020, and that's when we saw a big spike in people entering the trucking industry. I do want to say even good companies and good drivers can make mistakes. One of the lawsuits we looked at, the company had a satisfactory DOT rating and 3 inspections, none of which resulted in any out-of-service or serious violations. Still, that driver allegedly sideswiped a car, changing lanes on I-75, causing that vehicle to spin.
We're just talking about volume here. So many trucks making so many trips. We started off by saying 1.6 million deliveries every day just for Amazon. Why is Amazon different here when we're talking about lawsuits or complaints about safety?
I think it is because of the control that Amazon has over the drivers and the trucks that it is employing. Certainly when it comes to lawsuits, it could be the perception of liability. Attorney Adewale Odutunde explained that most retailers will hire a large trucking company to haul its goods, so it's sort of handing that staffing and safety responsibility onto the broker or that contracted company. But Amazon instead has what I kind of think of as an Uber for Amazon. They have designed an app where they offer loads to drivers that have the best ratings within its system, And so each load is contracted individually. Odutunde says Amazon has so much control and direct information about that cargo, the company is more likely to be named in a lawsuit.
The way that it is with Amazon, on all of their trailers, they have GPS on those trailers. So they know exactly where those trailers are going to be at any point in time. They know when they're stopped, they know when they're moving, and if they're stopped for too long, they will call the driver directly. So that is the other thing that is different. With most subcontractors, I would have to go through the motor carrier to get in contact with the driver. Amazon has direct contact with the driver. When the driver's not moving, they'll say, you need to be moving or you need to be explaining why you're not moving. And it also goes back to the metrics that they track is if you do not meet these metrics, you're not going to get business from us. And it creates a pressure and a burden on drivers, on companies to push it as much as they can.
And as for on the app, critics say it is the fact that Amazon's app is allowing it to hire these small and mid-sized carriers that otherwise might not get these kinds of jobs that is, getting by some of those inspections. I mean, not intentionally, not doing anything nefarious, but you just have to think again, because of volume, if you're just one guy and a truck, the percentage chance that your individual company is going to get stopped and inspected is certainly lower, and therefore then there's just less data for companies like Amazon to look at. So safety gaps are just not being identified or addressed before something bad happens. Now, Amazon says it is reviewing data daily to make sure that drivers it hires are safe, but when those inspections don't happen, there is no data for the company to analyze outside of what it is gathering on its own. And that's why some in the community want to see Amazon increase those standards. Families involved in some of these crashes believe that if the company is going to directly hire the drivers, it should have more control over directly training them and inspecting their vehicles. Odutunde has said in depositions, drivers have told him they know that they're being rated on timeliness, so when something goes wrong, they feel like they need to make up that time, which can then lead to unsafe choices. Now, on the flip side, since Amazon is able to collect data on how fast a truck went, you would think that that would also ping against them if they are speeding. Now, we know witnesses reported that driver that was in that crash on the Georgia-Tennessee border, that he was changing lanes a lot beforehand. We don't know if that meant that the driver was speeding, but it could mean that he certainly did not want to slow down.
Yeah, and you think about the pressure for on-time, fast delivery. I mean, there is so much happening in these scenarios at any given moment.
And if you even just equate it to kind of like, again, this is just me saying this, comparing it kind of to an Uber for Amazon.
Right.
But you think that driver comes, they know that they're going to get a rating.
Yeah.
So,
You don't want to be late.
Deliver. You don't want to be late.
Right. Now, what is Amazon saying about all of this?
I mean, obviously, they're going to point out all of the safety measures that they do have in place, even the things that they have changed since some of these accidents took place. They opted not to talk with us on camera, but they did respond to our questions in writing. And we have put all of the information from those responses on our website, 11alive.com. But overall, Amazon said it's proud of its progress that it has made on safety. A spokesperson told me the company has implemented driver ID verification for each and every load to try to catch that double brokering that we talked about earlier. That's when one company accepts the job, but then passes it off to someone else without Amazon knowing. Through its app, it gives drivers route-specific weather forecasts and routes to follow so that they are taking, the path that is the most safe for trucks and prioritizing interstate use over, smaller roads. It also feels that the data analyzed by that University of Tennessee professor is flawed. It says it tried to replicate his research methods and that they analyzed 33,000 roadside inspections that had Amazon listed as a shipper. And despite those notes, Amazon says 6% of those were not that it could find actually relay carriers, and that 28% didn't use an Amazon tractor or trailer vehicle identification number, so they couldn't verify whether the load was truly an Amazon load. But I do want to say, and while I give them credit for the changes that they have made in our reporting, we were looking at 3 or 4 different metrics, and all of them were showing the same trend. So you can get into the nuances of some
Sure.
of the data and how it was compiled, but it was compiled the same way for all of the carriers that we looked at, and each and every metric showed the exact same trend.
That's important. The trend, you don't want to get specific percentages,
Right.
kind of like overanalyze that. If there is a trend, it does lean into saying this is something that needs to be looked at. I mean, we're not going to be moving away from deliveries. This
Yeah.
is the world we live in now. You may, unless you're very young, remember a world where it wasn't just click it, 24 hours later,
Yep.
expect it on your front door.
Right.
But this is the world we live in, and it's just
we
going to
want
get
it. We want
faster
it
and more
fast.
volume. So really important topic to look at. Really appreciate you walking us through that, Rebecca.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So interesting. Something you don't think about daily, but we use daily. So just to remind our viewers, if you have been impacted by an issue like what's been featured in this discussion, or you have another story you'd like Rebecca to look into, call 404-873-9111 or email investigates@11alive.com. Thanks for joining Inside 11 Alive News Investigates. Take care.